and north of the border, you've been on a little bit more of the fear factor, which was COVID-19. What have you been up to?
Yes. Hello, Brian, and hello, Ben. Thanks for that. Yeah, this past weekend on Saturday was the Scottish People's COVID Inquiry, organized with Common Knowledge Edinburgh, which I've been promoting on the news recently. And we had Professor Richard Innes, who is the chair of Common Knowledge Edinburgh and an emeritus professor of evolutionary biology, was on with us recently to discuss the event. So I've got some photos and some coverage here just to kind of start a little bit of reporting, because this is very important information that needs to get out. This is just a picture of some of the materials at the registration desk, which I just wanted to show, because just to make sure that the UK column business cards were out there, right, along with our materials with the program for the day and so on. The next photo I want to clarify is simply a joke. This was a badge that one of our members created for Nicholas Sturgeon, care of HMP Sterling, a paroled attendee. Her badge was out the whole time. Unfortunately, she didn't show up to join us. Can't imagine why. So the introduction was done by Richard, and one thing that I think was really good to see that he started by saying to remind everyone who is speaking today has their own opinions, and maybe not everyone agrees on every subject, but that we all had the freedom to say what we wanted. And that included those of us who were giving presentations, as well as the people who were there, because this is meant to be an actual people's inquiry, meaning that nobody is censored and everyone can say whatever they believe, and not everyone has to agree, and that's fine. He went on to remind us, as we can see here, this is a very important point that several of us brought up, that on the gov.uk website, as of 19th of March 2020, COVID-19 is no longer considered to be a high-consequence infectious disease in the UK. That has been up there since 2020. It remains up there today. 4 days later is when the UK government decided to lock us up. He also reminded us, Jason Leitch up here in Scotland, our former national clinical director, said on the 10th of September 2020 about the tests that were informing everything that we did. He actually said, the test we have just now is a bit rubbish. I don't believe it got any better, unfortunately. The assumptions of the Scottish government COVID inquiry that have been going on, so far it's cost around £25 million as of September last year, and it's still very much ongoing. Their assumptions that they're working from is that there was, in fact, a novel deadly respiratory disease called COVID-19, a scary pandemic, a scary virus, that there were justified, unprecedented sets of public health measures taken. The Scottish government, as Richard said, is essentially marking their own homework by doing their own inquiry, and that there are lessons to be learned for next time, which to me seems to imply that there is going to be another pandemic. We'll have to see what happens. Our inquiry, however, for the Scottish people means that there are no assumptions. We were asking the question, was there evidence for this novel deadly respiratory disease in Scotland called COVID-19 in March 2020 or not? Was the information given to the Scottish people accurate? And what were the government actions taken? Were they appropriate, justified, ethical, harmful? And the context that we are working from is that everything is attributable to government actions, not the result of a so-called pandemic of a novel deadly respiratory disease. So I'm going to go through quickly some slides of the main speakers and just a little bit of their evidence that they each presented, just some highlights. The first speaker after the introduction was Dr. Alan Mordew, who is a retired consultant in public health medicine and an epidemiologist. He talked about the public health measures that were imposed on us. And one of the interesting things that he mentioned was that all of those ridiculous things that they tried to make people do was in direct conflict with the UK pandemic preparedness strategy, which was written and published in 2011. It's a 70-page document that you can find online. The link will be in the show notes. And just a few highlights from what they said. And remember what happened compared to what this actually said. It would be a waste of public health resources and capacity to attempt to halt the spread of a new pandemic influenza virus. During a pandemic, the government will encourage those who are well to carry on with their daily lives, and that they will put in place plans to ensure a response that is proportionate. Of course, none of that happened. My talk was called the COVID-19 Campaign, Propaganda, Lies, and Fear. I was asked to talk about the media messaging, the propaganda, the government, and so on. And I went all the way back to the predictive programming that we saw in the films such as Outbreak in 1995 and the film Contagion in 2011. Applied behavioral psychology used against the public with resources directly tied to the UK government, such as SpyBee, SAGE, Behavioral Insights Team, and Mindspace. And I think I was the only speaker to actually mention globalist agendas such as the Great Reset and so on. So just as a quick reminder of what the propaganda was like, I believe we have a short video of some dancing nurses in Fife back in May of 2020. So they're not some of the best dancers that we saw. I think the other ones were crisis actors that were actually dancers. But anyway, there will be a full video that come out of all of the talks from the day, professionally recorded. But I do have a short clip here that was from the questions and answers from when I spoke. And just to set up this question that was asked of me, at the start of my talk, I disclosed to the audience that there was an NHS health board in Scotland who offered me money, a significant amount of money, to help them push the jabs on young people back in 2021. And I refused the money. And I believe that was actually the start of my cancellation as an academic. And the question was, then, you lost your livelihood as a result of your integrity, which was a nice compliment. Have any of the people who you previously worked with been in touch with you? And has anyone actually said anything to you? And I'm playing this clip because I want people to see the actual consequences of those of us who spoke up against the lockdowns and the jabs and so on. And here's what happened to me. No, nobody talks to me. I was working at Strathclyde in 2020. I moved to Napier in early 2023. I have no contact with anyone through this whole process. And then I continued to get canceled for things like my gender critical views and so on, ultimately leading to allegations of gross misconduct for speaking out on a podcast that wasn't related to my job because I made a gender critical comment. Nobody talks to me. When I resigned and said that I was resigning, nobody even said goodbye. I certainly didn't card. I certainly didn't get drinks out anywhere. I have no contact with any academic colleague except for the very few, like Richard and others who have seen it. But for the most part, they were also complicit that I think I scared them away. And we used to sit around talking about how many vaccinations we had and how many times we had COVID. And every time I said I was never vaccinated, I was never tested, and I never had COVID, there's just silence in the room. There's so much complicitness that what you would think is at the top of what should be very intelligent, educated people, and they were all in lockstep with each other, kind of like Matthias Desmet's, sort of mass formation psychosis, which I meant to touch on. But the mass formation psychosis was so bad in academia because they're so afraid of losing their funding, of losing their research, of losing their positions and their status, that they were too afraid to speak out. So now they're all in line with the World Economic Forum's agenda because that's what's pushing them, rather than the fact that they should be asking real questions and looking for real answers with real data. And this is where the corruption starts at the top, and it goes down to my former colleagues who will not even send me an email to say, congratulations, nothing. Yeah. So it was nice to get a small round of applause there, which actually happened several times throughout the day when anyone made a good point. It was a very lively audience, as you can imagine, with a lot of emotion attached to all this. We had Richard talked about some of the anticipated effects of the COVID measures, which the Scottish government knew were actually going to be happening. A massive increase in the death rate of care home residents through neglect, isolation, withholding actual needed medical treatment, and of course, midazolam and morphine, mislabeling these deaths as so-called COVID deaths, creating the illusion, and it was an illusion, that COVID is deadly, the generation of fear of COVID, both for the public and for the medical workers, the willingness of people to accept all the absurd and harmful restrictions, and the abandonment of medical ethical codes. Professor Martin Neal was another speaker who's a statistician and a co-author of the book Fighting Goliath. He talked about the patterns of death in relation to COVID-19 measures. He has a few very good points here. There was no evidence of viral pathogenicity before the behavioral changes to society. There was no virus before they made us start doing these things. In other words, the reattribution of deaths to COVID from other causes, deaths that did occur were caused by the medical and the public health response and were not due to a novel virus. On the next slide, every single policy not only failed to mitigate death from the so-called virus, but evidently made the situation worse. The COVID event was created primarily by fraudulent PCR testing, changes to death coding, and nitrogenesis, and he concluded there was no pandemic. Dr. Liz Evans, a retired doctor who is now with the Medical Freedom Alliance in the UK, talked about COVID vaccines and medical ethics. She had several urgent calls to action: a return to patient-centered medicine, protecting ethical doctors and whistleblowers, reestablishing ethical red lines, limiting the power of public health, outlining medical mandates, accountability in trials, justice for vaccine-injured and bereaved people, halting the COVID vaccine rollout, and a moratorium on the mRNA platform, period. And that includes the cancer vaccines and all the other vaccines that are coming down the line. Dr. Claire Craig was a diagnostic pathologist and the co-chair of the Health Advisory and Recovery Team, went through 6 delusions related to the vaccine and vaccine injuries. The whole world will burn is the first one if you don't get vaccinated. The idea that you are now unvaccinated just after being vaccinated, referring to those 14 days when apparently people weren't protected. Vaccines made Omicron less deadly. Omicron was never deadly. Omicron was never actually Omicron. Trials proved the vaccines were safe. The product was tested in the trials, and the vaccine injuries were very rare. Now I want to come to a bit of coverage from Richard / Biologyphenom, who provided a lot of the evidence that he pulled out of the official evidence, talking about the effects of COVID measures on people and human rights abuses. Let's play this video.
Your mum had a small funeral, 20 people in attendance. You couldn't touch her coffin. Again, I think this is material with which we are familiar.
If you all remember right, you could only get 10 people at a funeral.
Yeah.
There was between me and my brother and my kids and his kids, that wasn't even counting his man. He sat in a car park outside the church where Mum went into, outside the crematorium, in cars, and didn't even get to say a proper goodbye to their own sister. That was another thing my mum never wanted. My mum always wanted to have a send-off. Mm-hmm. She didn't get a send-off. No. We had to pick between our brothers and sisters who would actually get in to the actual, to get her cremated. It was the most horriblest thing ever. It was a bad enough time.
We also heard evidence from many witnesses regarding the restrictions in place on funerals, including the sealing of coffins and the restriction on the number of mourners in attendance. In certain cases, those restrictions caused family tensions, and family members had to take the invidious and difficult decision of who to invite to the funeral.
Absolutely tragic evidence there. I have some more information that I think I will hold off until extra time, but I just want to cover quickly the points that Richard was able to find by looking at this evidence. So just so far, he has found evidence officially, loss of basic and specialist medical care in the care homes, a rapid decline in the quality of life leading to death and in some cases suicide, severe impact of isolation in care homes, prescription of so-called just-in-case midazolam and morphine over the phone by GPs, the mere presumption of so-called COVID, the withdrawal of any other health care or dental care, and suspected COVID diagnosed if they were in a care home, period. Inappropriate blanket and forged do not resuscitate orders that were forced signatures that prevented legitimate medical treatment, powers of attorney discarded, denial of end-of-life visits by family, dehumanizing funeral restrictions lacking any human compassion, violation of human rights, including the right to life, freedom of torture and inhuman or degrading treatment, right to liberty and security, right to private and family life. With that, Brian, I'd like to move the rest of this to extra, but this is incredible that this has come out.
Diane, thank you very much, and thank you very much to you and the team there north of the border for sticking with this. Many people in the chat box are saying, yes, when we look back on this, it's incredible to remind ourselves of what actually happened and how the public in UK was treated. But we're dealing with some very, very dangerous people in government. And as I began the news, we are under attack. And I don't think, or I think that's becoming more and more obvious for people in UK. We're going to stay on the case. But thank you. If you like what the UK column is doing, please do support us. We can only do what we're doing with your support and financial help. So you can always make a donation to us or take out a membership, monthly or annual or a lifetime membership. Also remember the UK column shop is still there, and making a purchase helps us out. And also we get a small percentage from Clive de Carle's health products. But the key thing for the UK column team is that we produce all of this material for it to be shared. Of course, we're censored on YouTube and indeed Facebook still. So to get this information out, we need your help as our viewers and listeners to share our material. Please do also give us a mention. Now, a reminder that tickets are still going, and I'm delighted to say very quickly for our UK column on location in Cheltenham on the 5th of April. So if you haven't got a ticket, please consider getting one. We'd love to see you there. And I think it's going to be a really fun event, very close as it is to the donut. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, do a little bit of research. Now, I'd also like to say that tomorrow we've got another interview going out in the child stealing by the state. This is a number of mainly mums that have come forward to talk about what's happening to their children. So tomorrow, this one is going out with a lady called Yolanda. We met Yolanda about 8 years ago, and we did briefly report on her case. But in this interview, I've been able to get much deeper into what actually happened. And I have to say, it is shocking, as they all are. But my point is that if we cannot be sure our families are safe, our children are safe from the government in this country, then there's little else that matters. So I'm going to say, please do watch and share. What else have we got coming up? Well, we've got the conference on the 22nd of February by Public Child Protection Wales, and Kim Isherwood and her team have done such fantastic work speaking out against the grooming, the sexualised grooming of children in our schools. Scottish People's COVID-19 inquiry. Diane's given us a really good run through what's actually taken place so far. But Saturday the 22nd of February was that event. That's now passed, but I'm sure that the committee will be carrying on with that good work. We've got Stand Up to be Counted on Sunday, March the 16th. Doors open at 9 a.m. That's £15 entry. And as with all of these events, people need a little bit of money to help them do what they're doing. So if you can afford that, please give them some support. And academics for academic freedom, we've got another event coming up on the 27th. Diane, do you want to say a few words on that?
Yes, this is a free event in Newcastle. If you are in Newcastle or can get to Newcastle, please join us. So this will be a debate about free speech, no ifs, no buts. So Dennis Hayes, the director of Academics for Academic Freedom, who's emeritus professor, and helped me quite a bit during my cancellation as an academic, will be speaking. I will be down there earlier in the afternoon. So if anyone wants to get together for a pint or something before the talk, I'd be happy to meet you. And I'll be interviewing Dennis, and I will have a report on this event next Monday.
Okay, thank you very much for that.